Hi Noses, thank you so much for joining today's video. For those who don't know me, my name is Emmanuelle Moeglin. I'm the founder and perfumer of Experiment Perfume Club, and I record these videos on a regular basis to kind of show you the behind the scene of perfume creation, how perfumes are created, the ingredients that we use, how professionals are working, and yeah, to kind of like learn about the professional techniques. Okay, so here we don't talk about your typical perfume reviews or anything like this. Here we really talk about what's inside the bottles, the ingredients, the juice, how the fragrance is made, and so really to get you to understand the real vocabulary of perfumes and the real world of perfumers as well. This is really what I want to kind of convey to you guys when you watch these videos. So today the theme of this video is how to smell like pros. Okay, so that means what are the techniques used when you are smelling an ingredient or a perfume, and what is the vocabulary used when you are smelling an ingredient or perfumes. Okay, so let's refer to the ingredients of perfume as a scent. Okay, so the first things first is that when you have either an ingredients or perfumes or anything like this, how do you smell it? So you might be like, I'm going to smell it from the bottles. Absolutely not. Okay, so never smell a perfume or an ingredient straight out of the bottles. I mean, you can obviously, but you can do it like very quickly just to kind of like get a reference of what's in there. But the real way of smelling an ingredient is to use scent strips. Okay, so scent strips, many shape and forms. Okay, and the last one. So scent strips, what are they? You've seen them before in shops, perfume shops. The scent strips are a piece of paper that are specifically manufactured to smell and to evaluate perfumes or scent or ingredients. Okay, so do not take your typical printer paper and then cut strips of this. This is not at all the way to create scent strips. Scent strips are really specific paper. I do not know the manufacturing secrets of scent strips, but they are created by companies that are only doing this. Okay, so they really specialize in that area, and they only will provide you with a scent strips. Okay, so they're using a specific type of paper, using a specific pH, or I don't know, as I said, I don't know the secrets of manufacturing, but the great thing about scent strip is that they will render a scent in a very accurate way, but they will also hold the scent sometimes for days. Okay, so this is why it's very important to use, scent strip and not your typical A4 sheet from a printer. Okay, so now why do scent strip have different shape and form? So you have the thin ones and you have the larger ones here with pointy bits. Okay, so there are not necessarily a rule for like which one you should use for which occasion, but the thin one tends to be used to evaluate ingredients, whereas the thicker one tends to be used to evaluate perfumes, so formulas. Okay, one thing that is very important about the thick one with a pointy bit is to smell the perfume or the ingredients from the pointy bit. Okay, so a lot of you are used to, when you go to a shop, I know that you are being held that bit and you can smell from that, but the professionals, the way they do it, they will evaluate and scent from that pointy part. Okay, so scent strip, super important. Do not smell directly out of the bottles. You will be overwhelmed if it's an ingredients, or you will be smelling the alcohol, the ethanol if it's a perfume, if you do that. Okay, so the scent strip is allowing you to have a more detailed render of the smell. Okay, so that's the first thing, the scent strips. You can then let's talk a little bit about the technique of smelling ingredients comparatively. Ingredients or perfume, by the way, smelling scent comparatively. So you might have seen before a perfumer, a professional nose, holding a strips like this in a fan technique. Okay, so this is a really important professional technique used. It's not to kind of say I'm a professional perfumer. It's not that. It has a real purpose to it, and the purpose to it is that you do this, and then it allows you to compare one against another. Okay, by comparing one's perfume or ingredients against another, you can detect the nuance, and you can have the difference that are exacerbated. Okay, the difference is that if you smell an ingredient or perfume like this on its absolute, you're just going to smell it, you're going to describe it, it's going to smell the ingredients, but then the moment that you start comparing it to one another, then new facets appear to your nose. It's almost a technique that helps you, I would say. Okay, so a perfumer, professional perfumer, what it would do when it reworks on a perfume, like it's an everyday job, it's going to work on the formula several times, sometimes hundreds of times. It's going to work on the same formula with slight different variant. So this one, and this one are the same formula. So typically they smell more or less the same, but there is just one ingredient that differs. Okay, so by smelling comparatively, they can really see that exacerbation of this one ingredient and pick out the one that they would prefer and work off of that one. Okay, so comparative technique, the fan technique, is very important. At which point do you put it on your skin? So when you're professional, you don't put it like a consumer on the neck or here. You put it here, okay, on this part of the skin. Okay, so you can put it here as well, and so you can compare. You can spray or put some perfumes here, and you will smell like this comparatively. So if you go into, if you're lucky enough to visit one day a perfumer, for instance, you will sometimes see them, or if you watch documentary, you will see them doing this. So what they do, they smell the perfume that they're working on their skin, on this part of the skin, and they compare one against another, or two or three. Okay, so the skin is it's something that when you move from the scent strip on the skin, not necessarily straight away. Okay, so you always use the scent strip as your first entry into discovering and exploring an ingredient or perfume, and then you can move on to the skin only later on. Okay, when you want to understand how a scent develops on the skin. So the skin has different influence, because the skin has got its own acidity, so the pH of the skin will slightly alter the perfumes and make it different from one person to the other. One other technique as well is that you can use, of course, an ingredient in its pure form. So always remember, so this is violet leaf. Always remember, if you smell, evaluate, it's called by professional, an ingredient in its pure form, just do not dip it all the way down. Pure form means the ingredients will be extremely intense. Do not touch your nose, because otherwise you're going to be, your nose is going to be actually polluted. So you can evaluate it from here. But one technique that I really like, and we use when I teach perfumery in our online course, etc., is that you use the diluted version of what you are smelling. Okay, so this version of violet leaf is diluted in alcohol. You can see the comparison. It's not at all the same color because it's diluted, it's no longer green, but it allows you to be less overwhelmed. Okay, so of course it's it's great if you can smell from the pure ingredients, but if you don't have that pure ingredients, or if you think that this is too much, because especially for the first time that you want to smell an ingredient, you might be really overwhelmed. Then obviously the technique of using a diluted ingredients might be really, really helpful for you. Okay, so the way it works, you may want to use to keep your ingredients. Always write down what it is. Okay. And if you want to keep it and smell it in an hour, 2 hours, the following day to see how it evolves, you just bend the end and then you just leave it on your table. Okay, remember to write what it is. All right, so this for the techniques, the different scent strips, etc., that you can use, and how to, all of the different tips of like how to smell an ingredient or perfume. So now I want to move on into how to describe an ingredient or a perfume. Okay, so different entries into describing ingredients of perfumes like pros. So first off, you will use your vocabulary from your everyday vocabulary. Nothing complicated and nothing that is completely out of reach, okay? But it needs to be descriptive. What does it mean? Please avoid using words that are too generic. Too generic means it smells nice, it smells bad, I don't like it, or things like this. This is not something that professionals use, but however, you will use descriptive words that are borrowed from other senses, for instance. So if you think of how do you describe an artwork, a paint, a shape, a feeling, okay? So think of all of those words. So if you are describing a taste, for instance, you will say it's juicy, it's sweet, it's sour. So all of these words can be used for describing a perfume, an ingredient, or a scent. If you are using, for instance, a shape or touch, you will say it's round. You will say it's warm. You will say it's cold or it's sharp. So all of these are vocabulary used by perfumers and professionals, perfumers. Okay, so do think about your everyday descriptive words. Super important. Do not use the it's nice, it's not nice, it's bad, etc. No, ban this vocabulary if you want to use the real words of perfumers. There is another thing that also I would also be wary of, like using too much of, is the reference that are too personal. So what I mean by this is that it's completely fine to use reference for yourself for memorizing an ingredient of perfumery if you think that this perfume reminds you of your holiday cottage, okay? But this is for you. If you want to describe it to an audience, to a team, to other people, then of course if you start saying this perfume or this scent reminds me of my grandmother, then chances are that people are going to look at you like, okay, but I don't know what's your grandmother smell like, or so obviously do avoid those type of description when you are describing a scent to someone else, okay? So professional perfumers will always use the same type of vocabulary, which are the descriptive vocabulary borrowed from other senses, and of course describing an ingredient by family and subfamily. So using the real words of perfumery: citrus, floral, spicy, woody, oriental, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so main family, main characteristic, and then sub-characteristic. The third way of describing a perfume or scent is by referencing. So referencing or association. So when you smell an ingredient or perfume, it may remind you of another ingredient. Okay, this is very, very common, especially when you're describing a natural ingredients. So a lot of natural ingredients have linked to each other in their scent, and so it's very common that you can describe, for instance, a rose by referencing the smell of lychee and the smell of clove, for instance, okay, because rose is very spicy and is very fruity and it does smell of lychee. Okay, so remember these three categories: everyday vocabulary, but descriptive family and subfamily, so using the actual words, citrus, floral, spicy, etc., and then referencing or association with other ingredients. Okay, so let's take an example, a couple of examples that I want to smell with you. So I'm on purpose using ingredients that you guys know or you've heard of, and I'm using natural ingredients which tend to be more complex, so therefore more faceted and therefore easier to describe. So bergamot oil, how do I describe it? So bergamot, it's fresh, it's clean, it's green, it's sharp. So you see this vocabulary of like, it's kind of like your everyday descriptive vocabulary. Then we move on to the description of the family. So where in which olfactory category does that belong? Very citrusy, clearly citrusy, but also with some facets that are spicy, herbaceous, aromatic, a bit woody. So you can see here I'm using the words directly borrowed, well, directly born from perfumery. Okay, and the last thing that I can also use, remember, is this association, this linking, referencing other ingredients. So in the case of bergamot, it's clearly remind me of the smell of lavender and the smell of coriander seeds. Okay, this is due to the chemistry of bergamot essential oil that have common molecules and that you also find in lavender and you find also in spices like coriander. So it's quite peppery. Okay, so remember, main descriptive vocabulary, then family or subfamily, and then referencing association. Okay, let's move on to another ingredients. So I give you a couple of examples, and this one is another natural ingredient, which is the Jasmine Sambac Absolute. So when you smell Jasmine Sambac, so jasmine is warm, is deep, is round. So you see this kind of, feeling description. It's also, I really like to associate it, so personally, not everybody will see this, but it's quite a common way of describing it. I associate it with the smell of banana. So it's fruity banana or fruity pear. So again, you read this association. It's also quite spicy. So vocabulary born out of perfumery. Of course, if we move on to the main family, it's floral. It's heady. So heady again, that's that idea of feeling. And it's also animalic. So this slightly dirty facets, okay? So again, I've used this kind of descriptive vocabulary, warm, deep, heady, then a little bit more of the olfactory description, so floral, spicy, fruity, animalic, and this referencing other ingredients such as banana or pear, for instance. Okay, so you can see here two different ingredients, but using essentially the same kind of techniques and vocabulary. Okay. What else can I talk about? One thing that I really, really recommend always when you learn about perfumery. So when you learn ingredients or when you learn a perfume, when you want to memorize a perfume, okay, so you have a perfume and you want to learn it. So in order to learn it and to memorize it, the best way to do that is to describe it, okay? So write down all of your description, all of the words that comes to your mind. Okay, so just write them down and then go back to it again and again and again. The best way to discover and explore an ingredient, especially when it's the first time or the second time to discover it, is to smell it blind. Blind means you don't know what it is before you are discovering the label. Okay, so essentially, when I said to you the name before a description, this is not so much what I want you to do at home. What I want you to do at home is that pick out your bergamot essential oil bottles, but you don't know what it is, you haven't looked at the labels, you dip your scent strip into your bottles, and then you discover it, you start describing it. Okay, so the purpose of smelling blind, which is a technique used by student perfumers but also by professionals, then it's essentially it takes off any preconception or misconception about an ingredient. Okay, so for instance, if you are smelling rose, you may have a preconception idea of what rose smell of. Okay, and this will essentially prevent you to completely to see all of the different facets of rose. Okay, and you may miss the fact that rose smells very fresh, citrusy, lemongrass, or it smells a bit like lychee, for instance. You may have never discovered this before because you have smelled rose knowing that this was rose before you've discovered it. Okay, so smell blind, smell on scent strip, do not smell out of the pot, smell in the fan. Okay, like comparatively, it's a really good technique. Write down your description. Do not use generic vocabulary or vocabulary that is too personal. However, do keep in your own personal notes a personal reference, because it can really help you with your memory and memorize. So for instance, if patchouli reminds you of the smell of your cottage when you were a kid, then just write it down. But obviously, do not use that as a way to describe it to someone else, if that makes sense. Okay. All right. So that's it for this video on how to describe an ingredient or perfume like a pro. I really hope that you've enjoyed it. Remember to subscribe to our channels if you want to be notified with all of the new videos that we release. And this specific lesson, we are studying it in our online foundation course. So for those who are thinking about joining, so we're doing a whole modules about how to smell ingredients, how to describe ingredients, the words, etc. So really after that there will be no more secrets. But I hope this video have given you lots of tips and that you've enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye everybody.